So, my first time in Holland. How many here is from Holland? That's quite a lot, and that's expected. How many is not from Holland? All right, awesome. Right, just like me then.
Some people just go twice.
Yeah, they're not sure, right? What's in that coffee, Sebastian? So, NativeScript Developer Day, Europe. I'm here today to talk about the fact that NativeScript loves Angular, which it does. There are a lot of things with NativeScript when it comes to Angular that they are extremely similar. There are differences. They are not that big. I'm going to try to highlight as best as I can what those differences are and in what cases it doesn't quite work perfectly, because there is a solution to everything. Everything works almost perfectly, and for the cases that doesn't work perfectly, there is a solution. So you could be quite safe using Angular with NativeScript. Let's first talk about the structure of my talk. Hopefully the contrast is somewhat readable. You can see it, right? Just yell at me and say, I can't see, be louder, all right? You're awake, right? Great. Yeah. Awesome. So let's first talk about setup. And let's talk about commands that are nice for you to use, as well as productivity tools that's going to make you faster when you develop. Let's also try to cover what a project anatomy looks like once you scaffolded a NativeScript and Angular project. Let's talk about components and bindings. This is somewhat of a repeat if you know Angular, but it's important to highlight that there are things that NativeScript supports. Let's talk about routing, in what way it differs and what it looks like, from an overview level. Let's talk about forms, the different dialect of forms in Angular. And let's talk about HTTP. Yes, there are two different flavors in NativeScript. Let's talk about testing, finally. That's quite a few topics, right? I got 30 minutes, I think. So, with setup, what do you need to know about setup? Well, you got the NativeScript CLI, right? This is our command line tool that's going to make our life so much easier. With it, we can scaffold projects. We can use the TNS create. That will create a NativeScript project, but it will not be Angular. And today's topic is Angular, right? So to be able to create an Angular application, we actually need to use a flag, the ng flag. Or we can use the template with Angular. That would accomplish the very same thing. All right, commands. It's going to make us useful. TNS run. Without this, we can't really run a NativeScript application, so we better make sure that we know this one as well as riding a bike, right? There are, of course, no way for you to remember all the commands, or at least not for me, which is why I use the TNS help for it to list all the available commands. Of course, if you work for different platforms, when you need to add the Android or the iOS, you do TNS platform for every platform that you need to add to your project. All right, so there is another command called TNS device. This is to verify that you have a decent connection. And you got something called TNS deploy, which actually makes sure that your app package is placed on your device. Now, for the fun part, for the developer experience part. If you start out with a NativeScript Angular project, it's going to be somewhat painful unless you have nice plugins. So how many of you are on VS Code? All right, that's quite a few. Any of you who are not on VS Code? All right. I sincerely hope there are plugins, because I've focused on VS Code mostly. So with there is a plugin called Add Angular Native Files, and this is awesome, because this enables us to right-click on a directive. Directive. What's the word? Catalog. You know what I mean, right? Directory. Thank you. Obviously, I need more coffee. So once we right-click on a directive, we're actually able to scaffold an entire component. We get the component, the template, the CSS, and the test. We got Angular Language Service. So this is just Angular. So with this one, we get code completion. We get help with imports. It's almost like a proper Visual Studio. So, and with snippets, of course, we are never again going to write everything that we write when we create components, directives, pipes, and so on. We just write a component, we get this much, a pipe, and so on. You want to use this one. And with Angular 2 inline, for those of you who like to write inline templates instead of writing in a separate HTML file, this is for you, because this is going to give you highlighting support in Visual Studio Code, so you can actually see what's what, instead of a giant string with a backtick. Use these plugins. It's going to make your life so much better. So, project anatomy. Lots of similarities here between an Angular setup and a NativeScript setup, but there are differences. So, as for bootstrapping, this is what you would be typing in NativeScript. So you'd import this guy, platform NativeScript dynamic, from the NativeScript platform. This is what it would be looking like in Angular, and of course you always have the bootstrapping of the module. So you just need to remember, I mean, most likely you guys are going to be scaffolding the project from the CLI anyway, but it could be nice to know that there are very subtle differences in here. Okay, so when we look at the root module, this is our entry point into any Angular application. As for the root module, it needs to import a NativeScript module or literally nothing will work. So as long as you remember this guy, you're going to be in a good place. How many of you are actually on Angular currently? Quite a few, and the rest of you are doing something else. Pure TypeScript? Oh, 2 brave souls, all right. How about Vue Js? All right, 2, awesome. Okay, high NativeScript Angular domination, good one. So, as for routing, it's very, very similar. It's so similar, I had to look at it an extra time to make sure that there was a difference, but there is. So you define all your routes like you're used to. You have a list of routes. And as for the routing module, of course, it's not called router module within NativeScript. So it's wrapped in something called NativeScript router module. So as long as we are ensuring that we have that, we're going to be in a good place. So subtle name differences so far, right? And yes, let's make sure to import that guy. As for components and bindings, I mean, this is really why we're buying into the Angular NativeScript version so much, because we get to reuse every single piece of Angular knowledge that we have, especially bindings. We don't want to learn this anew, right? So we got string interpolation, we have attribute bindings, we have banana in a box, we like that one, right? Event binding, and of course, an interpolation looks like this. Here we have a label, we got some interpolation, and we also talk to a pipe. We got the attribute binding, which is just square brackets, and it being used here on the right, we see that we are using our little label here, and we're pointing to a property using an attribute binding. Am I going too fast? Yeah, I was telling you it's 1.3 speed, so if you're wondering. So event binding, this is as simple as just, instead of it being called click, it's called tap. That's the one thing you need to remember when you're dealing with buttons or anything clickable. So tap event points to a method down here in the component class. That's pretty easy, right? This is reusing Angular skills that we already have. And of course the banana box, or Shy in a box. You guys know Shy Resnick, right? Israeli guy, he always dresses up as a banana, at least on the Angular Connect. So. Right, so with the ng model, we just point to a object on our component, and that's pretty much it. The thing we need to remember is that we should be importing this guy to make sure it actually works. Otherwise, you might have some nasty debug errors to deal with. So there are some basic components for you to actually take from. I'm going to say that again. Okay, so the main difference between NativeScript and Angular is that you're not web developers, right? When you're in NativeScript, you are native developers, but you have Angular skills, which means that the main difference here is the component layer. There are a lot of nice components that NativeScript is giving you guys, but there is a corresponding web element, if you know what I mean. So, for example, the switch corresponds to a radio button. The label corresponds to a span or a free text. The list view corresponds to using the li tag, ul tag, or the li element. The text field corresponds to an input type text. Button is a button, big surprise. Image is an image, and we're missing a checkbox. I do believe there is a plugin here for Android. I'm not sure about the status of the iOS one here, but it's quite.
It's working.
Awesome. That's good news. Okay, as for routing, There are two different ways we can be dealing with routing in NativeScript. One of them is component-based. This is the one that Angular is leveraging currently. We have something called router outlet. This is where the content ends up. And of course, we have a slight renaming here with NS router link instead of calling it router link. So again, extremely similar, just subtle name differences. And of course, we got the page-based routing. So this is the second dialect of type of routing that we can leverage. The main difference here is that we use a different outlet element. And well, of course, you change the entire page content when you use this. So my recommendation here is to use one of these per application and make sure you use the router outlet inside of it. Right, and of course, to our help, we got something called the action bar, which allows us to leverage the page routing. So we can actually, for example, do a back navigation. And we got programmatic routing, which we can use with the router extensions here. And well, as you can see, we can do a transition, nice animation, and some linear curving of it. Two different types of routing. Okay, as for forms, again, we have two different dialects that you probably know of already, if you're Angular developers. We got template forms. We need to, the main thing we need to remember here is what is the module called, so this actually works as usual. It's called NativeScript Forms module, and it enables us to write something like this. Can you guys see this code? I'm not sure. I see it, but yeah, good. So here you can see we got two different text fields. We've got a view property that points to ng model, which is what we're used to in template forms. And of course, we need a way to make sure that our button is unusable in case the validation argument is not working, right? So we need to say, if this one is value and this one is value valid, then we can actually press the save button. I did see that the ng form is missing, but I mean, come on, unless you got 20 different elements, you're not actually going to use this one so much. But this is a thing I want to highlight. Other than that, this one works exactly like you're used to. So, I mean, 95% of whatever knowledge you have in this area is being reused in NativeScript. Reactive Forms is the other way of doing it. It's called Reactive Forms module. Big surprise, right? So essentially what we do with Reactive Forms is just programmatically, you know, on the component side of things, we are creating what our form should look like. So we have a form builder that will help us with that, and here we can specify every single field that we want. And of course, the thing we need to do to make this one work is just point out the form element that we create up here, and to get hold of a specific element up there. In this case, we want to get hold of name. We just do form get the name of the field, and we check it for its value, its status, or whatever it might be. Is clear? All right. HTTP. Again, we have two different alternatives. We have the promise-based HTTP that we could be leveraging if we want. This one comes with a getString method, a getImage one that gives us an image back, the getJSON, and the getFile. So this one gives us some nice and neat methods depending on what we want to do. We got the Angular HTTP, which is the one we used to from Angular. This one is, of course, we need this guy, NativeScript HTTP module. Once we have that, it's pretty much business as usual. Then we're able to add the operators that we want. We're able to import the HTTP service. Do you guys have any status on the HTTP client? Is it coming up? No? This one is pretty good anyway, right? I mean, we're still able to use the different operators. We get our answers back. We're able to parse it and display it using the async operator. So if we're used to Angular, this one just works. We don't need to worry so much. So it's pretty much just remembering the module name. That's as much as it is. So testing, an area we love to hate, right? We should be serious developers. We should write our test. We don't enjoy it, right? No. Okay, so to get up and running with testing, you do tns test init. After that, it's going to create you a directory called app tests. It will also create you a sample test. and it will install the NativeScript unit test runner for you. So remember to set that thing up. And of course, if you're going to write your test in TypeScript, which you want, you need to install the typings, and you do that easily with this one. And of course, to run your tests, you just do tns test. And well, to see that your test is actually going green or going red, then it's good to have a watch flag in there. And here is actually our little component at play. So we've installed this nice, neat little NativeScript plugin. Once we do that, we will generate a component with test. So I recommend using this one because it's boring to have to hand type everything. All right. So here we're looking at the case where we try to test a component. How many of you have actually written test code for Angular? You feel it's painful? It's nice? Somewhere in between. I know. So as you are aware of, we are using a guy called testbed, and we call configure testing module. And in this case, we can do this in a different way because there is a component helper that will help us get the component, or we can specify it as a provider. Once we do that, we're able to inject it. Once we have the component itself, we're able to deduce, one, that it's specified, and two, what properties on it are set that should be set. Of course, this is Angular's way of doing stuff, especially if you got injections in the constructor of the component. However, if you want to do it the hard way, you can actually just try to require the class itself if you're not interested in the DI mechanism. I mean, you guys know that, right? So you can pull the component class, you can instantiate it yourself, but every single dependency in the constructor, then you have to resolve it. But I would recommend this approach still. And as you can see, it's normal Angular testing. So there's no surprises here, really. And of course, after all that boilerplate, we have our actual test where we just test for something, right? Luckily, we can use copy-paste. Don't do it, but yes. All right. So ng-zone. There are situations where NativeScript won't help you. There are very few of those cases, but of course ng-zone is here to the rescue. There are cases where change detection is not picked up. For example, when we programmatically add view children or we try to use a component such as the FPS, there are cases when things are not being updated. We have a solution. It's called ng-zone. So once we inject the ng-zone, we're able to talk to it and do the run here, and everything that happens within here will tell the view layer stuff has happened, stuff will be updated. So this is your patch for the odd situation. I want to stress that. This is an odd situation. It's unusual. Most of the time, everything will just work fine. All right? But this one is in your arsenal, and I think you should use it. Wow. I think I talked at 1.5 speed, actually. So as for a summary, we have covered the following things: the setup, the components and bindings, the forms, 2 different versions, routing, 2 different versions, testing, HTTP, 2 different versions. There are minor differences, but the main point I was trying to make here today that are 99% of your actual Angular knowledge can be reused. So NativeScript truly embraces Angular, and that's the main point I'm trying to make here. Thank you.